Hi guys, I just want to say thank you for all the work that's been submitted so far, and well done to those of you that have engaged in that work. The next 6 weeks, we're setting up one piece of work which will take you right to the end of term, and it's all based on practicing an NEA 1, really important for preparation for September. Those of you that are coming into school will get a bit more information on this, and those of you that aren't able to come into school can use this presentation to support you working through this assignment. For the NEA that you're going to be doing in September, the teacher can't lead you through the whole process. You'll have to work out yourself how you're going to move forward with the piece of work as it is, and it is an assessment, it's graded. But for this one, it's practicing. So I'm going to guide you through how you would actually produce a piece of work like this, and hopefully it's going to be useful for you when you come to do the real thing. So the topic we've chosen is looking at how to achieve a perfect oven-baked chip. So if we look at the task title, which you can see on this sheet, and starting any project, we tend to highlight the keywords. So mainly we're looking at investigating the working characteristics. So if I just highlight here, functional and chemical properties, lots of technical language used here, and we'll try and unpick it in a minute. And we're looking at how to achieve, it's not just the ingredients, so we're looking at the ingredients that you would use to make this perfect chip, and methods. So obviously you can cook chips in lots of different ways, and we're aiming to get a perfect oven chip. So don't be put off by these technical words. Basically, you're showing that during the assignment you need to show that you've got an understanding of how ingredients work together, how the potatoes, the oil, the seasoning, how they work together scientifically, functionally, in order to come up with a perfect chip. So as for any experiment, you need to make sure you have a fair test. We've talked about this in class before, but thinking about only changing one thing. So it may be the oil that you use, it might be the type of potato, it could be the way you cook it, or it might be the time that you cook it for. But in order for it to be fair, you only really need to be looking at one change at a time. You also need a control recipe, so the recipe that you think will work the best. So the reason that I've chosen oven-baked chip is basically for safety reasons. I didn't really want you all using deep fat fryers or filling saucepans up with hot oil and cooking at home. I didn't think it would be safe. So the method of cooking you're going to use for these chips is baking. So that will be consistent all the way through. Baking is also obviously a healthier way of making chips. So if I scroll down, we can see how this work would be assessed. So this is just the mark sheet that would be used to feedback how well you did. And if we're looking at section A, which is what I'm introducing now on this part of the work, to achieve the 5 marks, it's out of 5, which doesn't seem many marks, and it's your research section. To achieve those 5 marks, you've got to have thorough research, you've got to collect it from a number of different sources. So you need to think about using recipe books, looking on the internet to some good cooking or recipe sites like the BBC food site, maybe watching a chef in a video making chips. It could be asking people and talking to people. So it could be loads of different types of research that you could use. And once you've done that research, it's making sure that you've analysed it and understand it. And from that research, coming up with a control recipe and your variables, and then predicting the outcome. We've done this before, and it's called a hypothesis. So you're predicting what the best way of making chips is, and then you're doing an experiment to actually see if that is the right way and that is the best way. To get that 5 marks, you really do need to be using science, food science language. So finding out and having an understanding in your research of what's happening to the potato when you heat it up, when it's got dry heat, when it's in an oven, when you cover it with oil, what's happening to the seasoning and the flavourings, etc. So it's not difficult to definitely get within the 3 and 4 mark bracket. So that may be where most of us should be aiming at the moment, to get more than 3. That's using a number of research and making sure you've planned an experiment with a hypothesis. Okay then, so section A, to get those 5 marks, is all about researching the task, creating a plan, and then writing a hypothesis. So we've looked at the task title and we've identified the keywords, and we know that we're going to be baking chips to find out the best recipe. we know probably already that chips can be made using lots of different ingredients, different ways of cooking. For this assessment, we've defined the way of cooking. We're saying it's baking, so we're not experimenting with different cooking methods, but you might experiment with different potatoes, different oils, different fats, different seasonings. And although you can't really experiment with different cooking methods, there are ways that you may decide to research where the chips are boiled first before they're cooked off in the oven. So that may involve some changes in cooking method. So the first bit of research that I suggest you do is just think about what you know already. So describe in your own words what you think an oven-baked chip should be, how it should be made. How do you know you would make them in school? How have we made them before? Maybe how do your parents or people that have cooked for you before, how have they made them? I'm not talking about going to the freezer, getting a bag and getting the McCain chips out. We're talking about if you get a potato and make it into chips. So that could be your first part of research, and you can write that down there. Then we're looking at producing a mind map. So on the mind map, you could start to research and find out different ways of cooking chips. You could get lots of information from other people, obviously not pupils in the class at the moment because we're not in class. You could ask other people. You could then start to research on the internet and in books and come up with a whole different range of things to consider. So it might be type of potato, the oil. You could name some different oils that you could use. If you know names of different potatoes already, you could put those on there. And of course, when you make chips, you can actually make vegetable chips. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're looking at producing a chip from a potato. So that could be a variation that you could look at. So for each of the sections, I've given a challenge section. So mainly the work is going to be aimed at probably grade 3 to 6. But if you're aiming higher, and many of you could look at varying for each variation on the mind map. You could think about how it could affect the final chip. So show a little bit more knowledge on your understanding of that mind map rather than just popping one word down. Actually explaining that part of it would show that you have a better understanding. So the next bit of research could be to find out about different potatoes, lots and lots of different potatoes that could be used to make chips. And it's all to do with their structure and their starch content and their water content that will make them good or bad at producing chips. So you could start to find out some information on that, which might lead you to understanding what potato you would use for your control recipe. But the challenge here, if you wanted to look at accessing those higher marks, would be to think about where potatoes come from. Locally grown potatoes or potatoes produced in England will be more environmentally friendly, have a lower carbon footprint. So that's important. That might be important to you in producing the perfect chip, because when we're talking about perfect food, we're not always talking about perfect taste and texture. We're also thinking about all those other issues behind food preparation, and effect on the environment and sustainability is really important to some people. So you may want to find out a little bit about that. So potatoes, vegetables can be cut in lots of different ways, different shapes, different sizes, and you'll see this from your research. So maybe find out different methods of cutting and preparing the potatoes in order to get this perfect chip. Video clips probably would help you to do that, and that would be good to get an idea of what way you're going to cut these chips. Remember, to make it a fair test, then they would all need to be cut in a similar way if you were comparing the oils or the potatoes. If you were thinking of using one type of potato, you could then cut it in various different ways to see which is the best shape. So just have to remember to only vary one thing consistently across the board. Finally, one of the key ingredients to make chips is going to be the fat. And we're talking about the fat that you would coat the potatoes with, not the fat that you would fry them, because we're not frying, we're not deep fat frying or shallow frying for safety reasons. So we're really looking at the type of fat, not to cook the chips in, probably the type of fat. I just changed that type of fat to use in the recipe. if you remember when we made chips at school before, we basically chip the potato, pop them in a bowl, drizzle some oil over it, put them on our baking sheet, and then bake them in the oven. And also, I think possibly we added seasoning to them. So looking at the type of fat that you might use for that, olive oil, rapeseed oil, vegetable oils, lots of different oils you could use. Is oil the most appropriate thing? Are there other oils that you consider doing some research on? In order to make this a little bit more challenging for some of you, if I just scroll down, the challenge would be to have an understanding of that chemical structure of fats and how the chemical structure of fats affects the working characteristics. When you're putting the fat onto the potato and cooking it, how is that fat reacting? And so you may decide you want to try and find out a little bit about the chemical structure. Finally, one of the other challenge aspects of this is thinking about health implications to do with the fats. So some fats may be healthier. Obviously, baking chips is healthier for you than frying anyway, but that might be important to you. It might be important that not only do you get a good quality chip, but also that the chip is relatively healthy. So now you've gathered all of this research, the final thing that I need to take you through is how to write a hypothesis. So you're looking at predicting what you think making the statement of what you think the best way is to make this perfect chip. So I'm just going to model an idea from hypothesis here. So it could literally be a very simple statement. I think the perfect chip can be obtained using a standard supermarket potato which has been drizzled, sorry, I have to explain how that has been cut into size pieces and drizzled with, so I'm going to say vegetable oil. I haven't done the research, so I'm just guessing at this at the moment. So your research will lead you to this. Size been drizzled with vegetable oil. This would be baked in oven at 190 degrees C for 30 minutes. So you can see it's a really simple hypothesis, and it's really important you've done some research that leads you to a hypothesis. It all has to link. It can't just be pulled from thin air. So your research has led to my research, pretending my research has led me to this. I could be more specific and maybe name the type of potato, and I need to specifically say what size I'm going to do the chips. And possibly I would suggest that turning them or moving them on the baking tray halfway through cooking would be appropriate as well. Could be a little bit more detail in that hypothesis. So we're pretty much at the end of section A, pretty much ready to plan the experiment. I'm going to do another presentation on how to plan the experiment next week. It's really important that you keep a bibliography, which is a reference. Sorry, there's just a mistake on there. Reference all the resources that you've used during the work. You'll have to do this for the proper one that you do in September. And so it's just basically recording the websites, the books, and everything that you've used to support you with this work. So hopefully you've got a bit of an idea of what to do. It's entirely up to you how you present this work. You could produce a PowerPoint, you could print off the sheets and do it all by hand. Those of you that are coming to school, I can give you paper copies of the sheet and we can really talk through so you have a good understanding of what you're going to be doing. I'm not going to move on to section B until next week. Section B will be the actual carrying out the experiment, getting the experiment planned and carrying out the experiment. So I hope that you're going to be able to get on with this. If there's any queries or questions or you're not sure what to do, please message me either on Show My Homework or email me. That's not a problem at all. And I shall check in with you next week and hopefully have another presentation to help you with your work. Bye.